Hey guys! Tonight we slip into the peculiar world of Victorian England, where ladies faint with alarming regularity, crumpling onto chaise lounges like delicate petals in a storm. Picture yourself in a stuffy parlor, the air thick with lavender, perfume and the rustle of silk skirts. A young woman sighs, her eyes flutter, and thud she's out, gracefully collapsing as if it's part of the evening's entertainment. Why does this keep happening? You're about to find out. But fair warning, surviving a day in this corset-clad, etiquette-obsessed society might be tougher than you think. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into London, 1850, where gas lamps flicker on cobblestone streets and the air smells faintly of coal smoke. Women of the upper classes glide through drawing rooms, their waists cinched to impossible proportions, their faces pale as porcelain. Fainting, or swooning, as the poets call it, isn't just a medical quirk, it's practically a cultural hallmark. Mainstream history tells us that Victorian women fainted due to a mix of physical constraints and social pressures. Corsets, those whalebone cages, squeezed organs and restricted breathing, making a sudden drop to the floor almost inevitable. But there's a quirky tidbit. Some women carried tiny vinaigrettes, ornate silver cases filled with vinegar-soaked sponges to sniff and revive themselves mid-swoon. Imagine fumbling for your emergency vinegar while the room spins. Historians still argue whether fainting was purely physical or a subconscious escape from rigid expectations, a way to pause the relentless performance of femininity. You're in a grand townhouse now. The wallpaper a dizzying swirl of roses. A debutante across the room sways, her gloved hand clutching a fan. You notice her tiny, rapid breaths, like a bird trapped in a cage. The corset's to blame, sure, but there's more. Society demands she embody delicacy, a word thrown round like confetti. Delicate ladies don't just walk, they float. They don't argue, they demur. And when the world feels too much, they faint. It's almost theatrical, but you can't help wondering, is she truly unwell? Or is this a quiet rebellion against a life of restraint? Let's be real. If you had to balance a teacup, smile politely, and breathe through a straw-sized waist, you'd probably hit the floor too. Joke number 1. Maybe fainting was just Victorian women's way of saying, I'm done with this tea party. Good night. The streets outside hum with horse-drawn carriages. But inside, the air is still, heavy with expectation. You glance at the debutante again, now revived and sipping water. Her maid hovers, ready with a damp cloth. This isn't rare. Fainting happens at balls, dinners, even church. It's so common that novels of the era, like those by the Bronte sisters, describe heroines swooning at every emotional peak. But here's the thing. Not every faint is a medical emergency. Some women, you suspect, use it strategically. A well-timed swoon can halt an awkward conversation or win sympathy from a suitor. It's like the Victorian equivalent of "my phone died, gotta go." You smirk, imagining yourself pulling that move at a boring meeting. As you linger in this parlor, you feel the weight of the era's contradictions. Women are pedestalized as fragile angels, yet expected to endure grueling social marathons. The fainting epidemic, you realize, is a puzzle with many pieces: fashion, medicine, culture, and maybe a dash of performance art. You're starting to see why these ladies hit the deck so often. but there's more to uncover. The corset's grip is just the beginning, and the deeper you go, the stranger this story gets. For now, you lean back against a velvet cushion, the room's warmth lulling you, and let the hum of Victorian life carry you forward. You're still in that stuffy Victorian parlor, the faint scent of lavender lingering as you adjust your imaginary bustle. The debutante from before is back on her feet, but you're starting to feel a little lightheaded yourself. Why? Let's talk about the corset, the rib-crushing villain of this fainting saga. You're laced into one now, and it's like being hugged by an overzealous python. Mainstream history confirms corsets were a staple for Victorian women, worn daily to achieve that coveted hourglass figure. They compressed waists to as little as 18 inches, squashing lungs and shifting organs like a game of anatomical Tetris. Breathing, more like sipping air through a straw. No wonder fainting was a regular event, your body screaming for oxygen. But fashion says, not today. You tug at the corset's laces, feeling the whalebone dig into your sides. It's not just tight, it's a lifestyle. Girls as young as 12 were trained to wear these, their bodies molded over years to fit society's ideal. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some corsets came with health features, like elastic inserts or ventilation holes, marketed as fainting-proof. Spoiler alert, they weren't. You imagine a sales pitch, breathe slightly less terribly with our patented air slits, and chuckle. Joke number 1. Corsets were basically the Victorian version of wearing a juice cleanse around your torso. Historians still argue whether corsets alone caused most faints or if they were scapegoats for deeper issues. Some say poor nutrition or stress played bigger roles, but you're skeptical. Try dancing a waltz with your diaphragm in a vice and see how long you stay upright. You're in a dressmaker's shop now, surrounded by bolts of silk and measuring tapes. The seamstress, a stern woman with pins in her mouth, tightens your corset another inch. You gasp, your vision spotting. She mutters about proper posture, but you're plotting your escape to a world with sweatpants. The shop's mirror reflects your pinched silhouette, and you notice other women wincing as they're fitted. Corsets weren't just fashion, they were status. A tiny waist signaled wealth, no manual labor to bulk you up, and femininity so fragile it demanded protection. You recall that debutante from the parlor, her swoon almost poetic. Was her corset the culprit? Or was she leaning into the role society scripted? You're starting to see how these contraptions shaped more than bodies. They shaped behavior. A lady who can't breathe can't exactly storm out of a room or debate politics. Fainting, then, feels like a side effect of control. You stumble out of the shop, the corset still gripping like an over-attached ex. On the street, you spot a working-class woman in a looser dress, no corset in sight. She's hauling laundry, her face flushed but steady. Not a fainter, you bet. This hints at a divide. Corsets were less common among the poor, who couldn't afford them or the leisure to swoon. Yet even they weren't immune to the era's fainting craze, as you'll find out later. For now, you're stuck in this torture device, your ribs protesting with every step. Joke number 2. If corsets were so elegant, why didn't men wear them to tea parties? The sun dips low, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. You're heading to a grand house next, where fainting isn't just a risk, it's practically an architectural feature. The corset's grip lingers, a constant reminder of why these ladies hit the floor. You take a shallow breath, steady yourself, and move forward, the rustle of your skirts blending with the city's hum. The deeper you go, the more you realize this fainting business is a tangle of fashion, culture, and maybe a little rebellion. Let's keep going. You're gliding through the oak-paneled halls of a Victorian mansion now, the air heavy with beeswax polish and the faint creak of floorboards. Your corset's still squeezing, but you're distracted by the opulence crystal chandeliers, gilded mirrors, and velvet drapes that pool on the floor. You're here to uncover a peculiar feature of these grand homes: fainting rooms. Mainstream history notes that wealthy Victorian houses often included small, discreet chambers where ladies could recover from their swoons, tucked behind parlors or near ballrooms. These rooms were equipped with cushioned chaises, lavender-scented pillows, and sometimes a maid on standby with smelling salts. You push open a heavy door and step into one, the space dim and cool, like a secret hideout for the dramatically delicate. The room's walls are papered in soft green, and a single window lets in slivers of light. You sink onto the chaise, feeling the plush upholstery cradle you. It's cozy, sure, but also a bit absurd, like a designated napping zone for adults. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some fainting rooms had hidden compartments for restorative tonics, which were often just brandy or laudanum. You imagine a lady sneaking a sip, claiming it's for her nerves, and you stifle a laugh. Joke number 1. Fainting rooms were basically Victorian panic rooms, but for when your corset wins the argument. Historians still argue whether fainting rooms were common, or a myth exaggerated by later writers. Some say they were standard in elite homes. Others insist they were rare. More literary trope than reality. You're skeptical either way. Building a whole room for swooning seems like overkill. But then again, Victorians loved their theatrics. You notice a small table with a silver vinaigrette, that vinegar-soaked sponge you heard about in the parlor. You give it a sniff, and your eyes water. Nope, not relaxing. You set it down, wondering how anyone found this reviving. Lying back, you picture the scene: a ball in full swing, music swirling, and a lady let's call her Beatrice swoons mid-waltz. Her partner catches her because of course he does, and she's whisked here, to this very room. The maid fans her, the brandy's poured, and Beatrice is back to batting her eyelashes in no time. It's almost too perfect, like a rehearsed play. You start to suspect these rooms weren't just for recovery, they were stages for performing Fragilite. Why? A lady who faints gets attention, sympathy, maybe even a marriage proposal. You smirk, thinking of modern equivalents, like faking a bad Wi-Fi signal to dodge a Zoom call. The room's quiet hum pulls you deeper into the era. You recall the working-class woman from the street. No corset, no fainting room. She'd probably roll her eyes at this setup. For her, fainting might mean losing a day's wages, not gaining a suitor's concern. This divide fascinates you. Fainting seems tied to wealth and leisure, yet it's a universal enough phenomenon to cross class lines, as you'll explore later. For now, you're in this cushioned cocoon, the mansion's grandeur fading into a soft blur. Joke number 2. If fainting rooms had Yelp reviews, they'd be 5 stars for ambience, 1 star for practicality. You rise, smoothing your skirts, and slip back into the hallway. The mansion's alive with whispers and footsteps, and you're heading toward the heart of Victorian society next, where fainting isn't just a quirk, it's practically a social currency. Your corset pinches, the fainting room's scent lingers, and you move forward, the era's strange rhythms guiding you. The deeper you dive, the more you see how these swoons wove into the fabric of daily life. Let's keep drifting. You're swept into the heart of a Victorian drawing room now, the air thick with the clink of teacups and the murmur of polite chatter. Your corset's still a nuisance, but you're too busy navigating this social minefield to care. The room's a sea of lace and stiff collars, every gesture calculated. every smile a performance. You're here to uncover how Victorian etiquette turned fainting into a bizarre badge of honor. Mainstream history tells us that upper-class women were bound by rigid social codes, expected to embody grace and fragility. Fainting, oddly enough, became a way to prove you were delicate enough to belong in this elite world. A well-timed swoon could signal refinement, like tripping over a hoop skirt and calling it ballet. You settle onto a velvet settee, a teacup balanced precariously in your gloved hand. The hostess, a woman with a stare sharper than her brooch, watches you. You're supposed to sip daintily, laugh softly, and apparently faint if the conversation gets too intense. Here's a quirky tidbit. Etiquette manuals, like the Lady's Guide to Perfect Gentility, advised women to master the graceful swoon, suggesting they practice collapsing without spilling their tea. You imagine yourself rehearsing in front of a mirror, aiming for Oscar-worthy elegance, and snort quietly. Joke number 1. Victorian ladies probably had a better feint than your average TikTok dance routine. Historians still argue whether fainting was a genuine health issue or a socially encouraged act. Some say women internalized these expectations, their bodies responding to pressure with a convenient blackout. Others think it was partly theatrical, a way to wield power in a powerless role. You're leaning toward the second theory. Across the room, a young woman, Clara, let's say, sighs dramatically, her fan fluttering like a distressed butterfly. She sways, and the men leap to her aid, their faces a mix of concern and admiration. Clara's fine, of course, but she's just earned a week's worth of gossip and a suitor's devotion. You raise an eyebrow, impressed. That's some next-level strategy. You take a sip of tea, the bitterness grounding you. The rules here are relentless. Don't slouch. Don't speak loudly. Don't exist too boldly. For women, being delicate means being a living ornament, admired but not heard. Fainting fits perfectly. It's a silent protest that doesn't break the rules. You recall the fainting room, that plush sanctuary from the mansion, and realize it's part of this game. A swoon gets you escorted out, pampered, and praised, all without saying a word. It's like pulling the fire alarm to skip a test, except everyone applauds you. Joke number 2. If fainting was a sport, Victorian ladies would have swept the gold. You glance at Clara again, now revived and basking in attention. But not everyone's playing this game. You think of the working-class woman from the street, her arms full of laundry, no time for theatrics. For her, fainting might mean trouble, not triumph. Yet even she's caught in this culture where fragility is fetishized. The divide's stark, and you're curious how those outside this gilded cage handled the swoon trend. You'll get to that later. For now, you're trapped in this etiquette jungle, where every move is scrutinized. You set down your teacup, careful not to clink too loudly, and feel the room's expectations press in. The drawing room's warmth is lulling, the chatter a soft drone. You're heading to the world of Victorian medicine next, where doctors have their own wild ideas about why these ladies keep fainting. Your corset pinches, Clara's fan flutters, and you move forward, the era's strange customs wrapping around you like a heavy shawl. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Fainting wasn't just a quirk, it was a language. Let's keep going. You're now in a dimly lit Victorian physician's office, the air sharp with antiseptic and old leather. Your corset's still a tyrant, but you're distracted by the doctor's desk, cluttered with glass vials and a menacing stethoscope. You're here to dig into the medical theories behind why Victorian ladies fainted so often. And spoiler, the answers are as wild as they sound. Mainstream history shows that Victorian doctors often attributed fainting to women's supposedly delicate nervous systems. They believed females were inherently frail, their bodies prone to collapse under the slightest strain, be it a loud noise, a spicy novel, or a whiff of bad news. You settle into a creaky chair, eyeing the doctor's chart of female ailments, and brace for some serious nonsense. The doctor, a bearded man with spectacles perched on his nose, scribbles notes about nervous debility. He's convinced fainting comes from women's brains being too small to handle modern life. You roll your eyes, tempted to point out that his mustache is doing more thinking than his theories. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some physicians prescribed electric belts to jolt women's nerves back to stability. Picture a corset wired with a battery, zapping you awake mid-swoon. You imagine the sales pitch, shock your way to sturdiness, and chuckle. Joke number 1. Electric belts were probably the Victorian equivalent of chugging an energy drink. Historians still argue whether these doctors genuinely believed in nervous frailty, or were just parroting cultural biases. Some say they were projecting society's obsession with female fragility onto medicine. Others think they saw fainting as a catch-all for undiagnosed issues like anemia or heart strain. You're siding with the bias angle, calling women delicate feels like a convenient excuse to keep them in check. The doctor hands you a pamphlet titled Hysteria and its cures, and you skim it, unimpressed. It lists fainting as a symptom of everything from overreading to moral excitement. You wonder if moral excitement includes getting mad at bad medical advice. You glance around the office, noticing a shelf of ominous tonics labeled female restorative. You recall the fainting room's hidden brandy stash. Seems like everyone's got a liquid fix for swooning. The doctor drones on about vapors, a vague term for anything from dizziness to existential dread. You're starting to see why fainting was so common. If breathing's a struggle and your doctor thinks your brain's on vacation, collapsing feels like a logical response. It's almost like your body saying, "I'm out. Figure this out without me." Joke number 2. Maybe fainting was just the body's version of hitting the reset button. You lean back, the chair groaning under your weight. The doctor's theories are steeped in the era's gender norms, where women are fragile angels and men are sturdy oaks. You think back to Clara in the drawing room, her swoon earning gasps and sympathy. Was her faint a nervous reaction, or was she playing the part society wrote for her? The line's blurry. You're also curious about those outside this elite bubble, working class women, who you'll meet later. Probably didn't have time for vapors. For now, you're stuck in this office, where medicine feels more like storytelling than science. The gaslight flickers, casting shadows on the walls. You're heading to the world of Victorian remedies next, where the cures for fainting get even weirder. Your corset pinches, the doctor's pen scratches, and you move forward, the era's oddities humming around you. The more you learn, the more fainting feels like a symptom of a bigger machine, one built on control and expectation. Let's keep drifting. You're still in the Victorian physician's office, but now you're holding a tiny glass bottle labeled smelling salts that the doctor thrust into your hands. The air's still sharp with antiseptic, and your corset's grip hasn't loosened. But you're here to explore the bizarre remedies Victorians used to revive fainting ladies. Mainstream history confirms that smelling salts, pungent ammonia compounds, were the go-to fix for swoons, carried in ornate cases by every respectable woman. You uncork the bottle, take a whiff, and your head jerks back like you've been slapped by a ghost. Your eyes water, but you're definitely awake. These salts were designed to shock the senses, jolting a fainted lady back to reality. You're not sure if this is medicine or just bottled vengeance. You set the bottle down, still reeling from the smell, and notice a tray of other remedies on the doctor's desk. Vinegar-soaked sponges, lavender water, and something called hartshorn, which, fun fact, is made from deer antlers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women swore by burnt feathers as a fainting cure, waving singed plumage under their noses like a smoky alarm clock. You picture yourself frantically burning a peacock feather at a ball, and you snort. Joke number 1. Burnt feathers as medicine. Victorians were one step away from prescribing roasted pillows. Historians still argue whether these remedies were effective or just placebo theater. Some say the sharp smells of ammonia or vinegar genuinely stimulated breathing. Others think the ritual of reviving a lady was more about social performance than medical success. You're leaning toward theater after all. A dramatic recovery in front of an audience earns more points than quietly sipping water. You imagine Clara from the drawing room, her maid waving salts under her nose while suitors hover anxiously. The whole scene feels like a play, with props and all. You tuck the smelling salts into your pocket, wondering if they'd work on a Monday morning slump. The doctor's now lecturing you about stimulating tonics, which sound suspiciously like the brandy you spotted in the fainting room. He suggests a sip of nerve cordial for persistent swoons, but you're skeptical it's probably just booze with a fancier name. You recall the electric belts from the last office visit, and now you're picturing a Victorian lady zapped awake, clutching her salts, and choking on burnt feathers. It's absurd, but it fits the era's obsession with quick fixes for female frailty. Joke number 2. If smelling salts were Wi-Fi, they'd have one bar and a lot of attitude. You glance out the window, where gas lamps glow faintly against the dusk. These remedies reveal more than just medical quirks. They show how fainting was managed, almost choreographed. A lady's swoon wasn't just a problem, it was an event, complete with tools and an audience. You think back to the working class woman hauling laundry, no salts or tonics in sight. Her faints, if they happened, probably got less fanfare. You're curious how she fits into this swooning culture, but that's for later. For now, you're surrounded by these odd cures, each one a clue to the era's mindset. The office clock ticks softly, lulling you into the rhythm of Victorian life. You're heading to the world of fashion next, where the clothes themselves seem designed to make you faint. Your corset pinches, the ammonia's sting lingers, and you move forward, the era's strange logic wrapping around you. Fainting, you're realizing, wasn't just a reaction, it was a ritual, propped up by bottles and feathers and a whole lot of drama. Let's keep going. You're now in a bustling Victorian dressmaker's shop, surrounded by bolts of sapphire silk and creamy lace, the air humming with the snip of scissors and the rustle of petticoats. Your corset's still a relentless taskmaster, but you're here to unravel how fashion itself fueled the fainting epidemic among Victorian ladies. Mainstream history tells us that Victorian women's clothing was a multi-layered ordeal, with gowns, underskirts, and accessories weighing up to 15 pounds or more. Add a corset and a cage-like crinoline, and you're basically waddling around in a portable sauna. You're being fitted for a dress now, the seamstress piling on fabric like she's decorating a very fancy cake. Every layer makes breathing harder, and you're starting to see why fainting was less a surprise and more a schedule. The seamstress drapes a heavy velvet gown over your shoulders, its train dragging like a tired dog. You're also wearing a bustle, which feels like a small bookshelf strapped to your backside. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some dresses were so wide, thanks to crinolines, that women got stuck in doorways or knocked over candelabras. You imagine yourself wedged in a parlor entrance, waving for help, and let out a quiet laugh. Joke number 1. Victorian dresses were basically wearable obstacle courses, with a side of heat stroke. Historians still argue whether fashion's weight directly caused fainting or just amplified other issues like poor diet or corset pressure. Some say the sheer physical burden combined with tight lacing starved the body of oxygen. Others think fainting was partly psychological, a response to the exhaustion of performing perfection. You're betting on a mix of both. You try to sit, but the crinoline springs up like a rebellious umbrella, and you nearly topple. The seamstress clucks her tongue, muttering about elegance. Elegance? You feel like a human chandelier, and not in a good way. You catch your reflection in a full-length mirror, your silhouette absurdly exaggerated. These outfits weren't just clothes. They were armor for social battles. A grand gown signaled wealth and status, but it also trapped you in a cycle of discomfort. You recall Clara's swoon in the drawing room, her dress a frothy cloud of taffeta. Was she felled by heat, lack of air, or the sheer effort of carrying 10 pounds of fabric through a waltz? You're starting to think fashion was fainting's silent partner, conspiring with corsets to keep women wobbly. Joke number 2. If Victorian gowns were cars, they'd be gas-guzzling SUVs with no AC. You shuffle toward the shop's window, the dress weighing you down like a soggy blanket. Outside, you spot a working-class woman in a simple frock, moving freely with a basket of bread. Her outfit's practical, no crinoline in sight. Yet you wonder if she ever fainted under different pressures. That's a story for later. For now, you're trapped in this fabric fortress, every step a negotiation with gravity. The seamstress adds a feathered hat, because apparently you're not suffering enough. You smirk, imagining a Yelp review. 5 stars for style, 0 for survivability. The shop's warmth is lulling, the chatter of other customers a soft drone. You're heading to the social stage next, where fainting becomes less a mishap and more a performance. Your corset pinches, the gown's weight tugs, and you move forward, the era's strange rhythms guiding you. The more you wear these clothes, the clearer it becomes. Fashion wasn't just a choice, it was a fainting machine, built to keep ladies delicate and dizzy. Let's keep drifting. You're back in the glow of a Victorian drawing room, the air thick with perfume and the clink of crystal glasses. Your heavy gown drags behind you, the corset still pinching, but you're here to uncover how fainting became more than a medical quirk. It was a full-on social performance. Mainstream history reveals that in Victorian society, fainting was often seen as a hallmark of refined femininity. A lady who swooned at the right moment, say, during a heated proposal or a shocking bit of gossip, proved her delicate nature, earning admiration and concern. You're standing near a fireplace, its warmth making your crinoline feel like a portable oven. And you're watching the room's unspoken rules unfold like a carefully scripted play. Across the room, a woman, let's call her Evelyn, lets out a soft gasp, her hand fluttering to her forehead. She sways, and two gentlemen rush to catch her, their faces a mix of worry and awe. Evelyn's collapse is flawless, her silk skirts fanning out like a peacock's tail. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women reportedly practiced their feints, perfecting the art of crumpling without bruising or mussing their hair. You imagine Evelyn rehearsing in her bedroom, aiming for that Oscar-worthy swoon, and you stifle a chuckle. Joke number 1. Victorian fainting was basically method acting with better costumes. Historians still argue whether these performative feints were conscious or subconscious. Some say women internalized society's demand for fragility, their bodies reacting on cue. Others believe many swoons were deliberate, a way to manipulate social situations without breaking etiquette. You're leaning toward the deliberate side. Evelyn's now reclining on a settee, a maid fanning her with a lace handkerchief. The room buzzes with whispers, and a young suitor looks positively smitten. This isn't just a feint, it's a power move, a way to steer the narrative without saying a word. You're impressed, honestly. It's like dropping a mick, but with more petticoats. You sip a glass of watered-down wine, trying not to tip over in your gown. The drawing room's a stage, and fainting is one of its star acts. You recall Clara's swoon from earlier, her fan fluttering like a distressed butterfly, and the fainting room's plush chaise waiting for just such moments. These scenes feel choreographed, each collapse reinforcing the idea that women are fragile, ethereal creatures. But it's not just about weakness, it's about control. A feint can pause a conversation, shift attention, or even dodge an unwanted marriage proposal. You smirk, thinking of modern equivalents, like accidentally muting yourself on a video call. Joke number 2. Fainting was the Victorian version of sorry, I'm on airplane mode. You notice a quieter woman in the corner, her dress less extravagant, her posture less theatrical. She's not swooning, just observing. And you wonder if she's opting out of this performance. You think back to the working-class woman with her laundry basket. No time for such dramatics. Fainting as a social tool seems reserved for those with the leisure to play the part. But you're curious how others navigated this culture. You'll explore that soon. For now, you're caught in this gilded theater, where every sigh and stumble is part of the script. The fire crackles, its warmth lulling you into the era's rhythm. You're heading to the world of Victorian diets next, where what women ate or didn't made fainting even more likely. Your corset pinches, Evelyn's fan flutters, and you move forward, the room's soft hum guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Fainting wasn't just a reaction, it was a performance, woven into the fabric of femininity. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a Victorian dining room, the table gleaming with silver and starched linens, the air scented with roasted mutton and boiled cabbage. Your corset's still squeezing, your gown's weight dragging, but you're here to taste the meager diets that left Victorian ladies wobbly and prone to fainting. Mainstream history shows that upper-class women often ate sparingly, their meals shaped by etiquette and the ideal of delicate femininity. Small portions, bland flavors, and a focus on refined foods like white bread or weak broth were standard, leaving many undernourished. You're seated at the table, a tiny plate before you with a sliver of fish and a sad sprig of parsley. Your stomach grumbles, but the hostess beams, as if starvation is a personality trait. You poke at the fish, which is drier than a sermon. The portions here are laughably small, barely enough to fuel a sparrow, let alone a human in a 15-pound dress. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some etiquette guides suggested women chew each bite 32 times to aid digestion and preserve vitality. You try it, counting to 32, and feel like a cow with a math degree. Your jaw aches, and you're still hungry. Joke number 1. Victorian dining was basically competitive fasting with fancier napkins. Historians still argue whether poor diet directly caused fainting or just worsened other factors, like corset pressure or social stress. Some say nutrient deficiencies, low iron, scant protein weakened women's bodies. Others think fainting was more about cultural expectations than empty plates. Your bedding diet played a big role. You glance at the other ladies, their faces pale as their porcelain teacups. They nibble daintily, as if eating heartily might get them kicked out of polite society. You recall Evelyn's theatrical swoon in the drawing room. Maybe she was just hangry, not delicate. You sip a watery soup, its flavor as exciting as wallpaper paste. The corset doesn't help. It's squashing your stomach, making every bite feel like a negotiation. Upper-class women were expected to embody fragility and a hearty appetite. Didn't fit the script. You think back to the fainting room's brandy stash and the smelling salts in your pocket. Quick fixes for a body running on fumes. It's no wonder fainting was common when meals were more performative than nourishing. You imagine sneaking a burger in this era and getting arrested for unladylike gluttony. Joke number 2. Victorian diets were so light, they probably floated right into a swoon. Across the room, a maid clears plates, her arms sturdy from hauling coal. She likely eats heartier fare bread, cheese, maybe some bacon, but her life's no picnic either. You're curious about working-class women and how their diets and feints differed. You'll get to that soon. For now, you're stuck with this pitiful meal, your energy fading like the gaslight overhead. The hostess offers a digestive biscuit, which tastes like cardboard with ambition. You chew, counting to 32 again, and wonder how anyone survived this era without raiding the pantry at midnight. The dining room's warmth is lulling, the clink of cutlery a soft rhythm. You're heading to the overheated world of Victorian ballrooms next, where fainting becomes a nightly spectacle. Your corset pinches, the parsley mocks you, and you move forward, the era's strange rules humming around you. The more you eat or don't, the clearer it becomes. Fainting wasn't just about fashion or nerves. It was about bodies pushed to the brink by a culture obsessed with control. Let's keep drifting. You're swirling through a Victorian ballroom now, the air thick with the scent of beeswax candles and overheated perfume. Your corset's still a tyrant, your gown's weight dragging like an anchor, and that meager dinner of fish and parsley isn't exactly fueling your dance moves. You're here to explore how these stifling ballrooms turned fainting into a nightly ritual for Victorian ladies. Mainstream history notes that Victorian balls were swelteringly unbearable, with hundreds of guests packed into poorly ventilated rooms, gaslights blazing, and no air conditioning. Combine that with heavy dresses and corsets, and you've got a recipe for collapse. You're waltzing sort of with a mustachioed gentleman, but the room's spinning faster than the music. The chandeliers gleam, casting a golden haze over silk skirts and starched collars. You're sweating through your petticoats, the heat pressing in like a wool blanket. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ballrooms had ventilation committees tasked with opening windows, but they rarely did, because fresh air was considered unrefined. You imagine begging for a breeze and getting a lecture on decorum instead. You stifle a laugh, nearly missing a step. Joke number 1. Victorian ballrooms were basically saunas with a string quartet. Historians still argue whether heat was the primary fainting trigger, or just one piece of a larger puzzle, alongside diet and fashion. Some say the lack of oxygen in crowded rooms caused most swoons. Others think emotional overstimulation like a proposal or a scandalous whisper played a bigger role. You're betting on the heat. Your partner twirls you, and your crinoline nearly takes out a candelabra. The room's a furnace, and your corset squeezing your lungs into submission. You recall Evelyn's graceful swoon in the drawing room, but here, fainting feels less like theater and more like survival. You're one waltz away from hitting the floor yourself. You glance around, spotting other ladies fanning themselves desperately, their faces flushed beneath their powder. If you have already retired to the fainting room, you remember its plush chaise and hidden brandy stash. One woman sways, her partner catching her just in time, and the crowd murmurs with approval. It's almost routine, like spilling wine or stepping on toes. You wonder if some ladies faint to escape the heat, the dance, or maybe just their boring partners. You smirk, imagining yourself swooning to dodge this guy's monologue about his prize hounds. Joke number 2. Fainting at a ball was probably the polite way to say, "I'm done with this polka." You think back to the working class woman with her laundry basket, far from these gilded ovens. She might faint from exhaustion, not overheating in a ballroom. You're curious how her world intersects with this swooning culture. But that's for later. For now, you're trapped in this sweaty spectacle, your gown sticking to your skin. The music swells, and you notice a maid circling with a tray of watered-down punch, hardly enough to revive anyone. You take a sip, the liquid warm and useless, and wonder how anyone survived these nights without modern AC or a good sports drink. The ballroom's glow is lulling, the violins hum blending with the crowd's chatter. You're heading to the lives of working-class women next, where fainting takes on a different meaning. Your corset pinches, the heat lingers, and you move forward, the era's strange rhythms guiding you. The more you dance, the clearer it becomes. Ballrooms weren't just places to socialize, they were fainting factories, built on heat and expectation. Let's keep drifting. You're stepping away from the overheated ballroom now, trading chandeliers and silk gowns for the gritty streets of Victorian London. Your corset's still pinching, but the cool night air is a relief after that sweaty waltz. You're here to hear from working-class women whose fainting defied the delicate stereotypes peddled in drawing rooms and ballrooms. Mainstream history tells us that, while upper-class ladies swooned as a mark of refinement, working-class women, maids, factory workers, street vendors fainted too, often from sheer exhaustion or hunger. Their lives were a grind of long hours and little rest, and their collapses weren't met with fainting rooms or adoring suitors. You're walking beside a woman named Mary, her arms laden with a basket of mended linens, her face etched with fatigue. Mary's dress is simple cotton, no corset or crinoline to weigh her down. She's a laundress, up before dawn and working past dusk. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some working-class women used fainting as a brief escape, collapsing on the job to steal a moment's rest before being prodded back to work. You picture Mary slumping against a washtub, eyes closed for a precious minute, and you respect the hustle. Joke number 1. Victorian laundresses probably faked a faint better than an actor flubs a line. Historians still argue whether working-class fainting was mostly physical, caused by malnutrition or overwork, or partly a subtle rebellion against grueling conditions. Some say these women's bodies simply gave out. Others think fainting was a way to pause an endless workday without risking a beating. You're leaning toward both. Mary tells you, in a low voice, about days when she's eaten only bread and tea, her head spinning as she hauls wet sheets. You recall the meager fish and parsley from the dining room, but Mary's meals make that look like a feast. Her feints aren't performative, they're survival's breaking point. You follow her down a narrow alley, the air sharp with coal smoke and the tang of damp stone. She's headed to deliver linens to a townhouse, maybe the one with the fainting room you saw earlier. You think of Evelyn's theatrical swoon, her silk skirts fanning out, and contrast it with Mary's reality. If Mary faints, there's no chaise, no brandy, just a foreman's scowl or a docked wage. Yet she's heard the gossip about delicate ladies, and she scoffs, calling it rich folk nonsense. You grin, liking her bluntness. Her strength challenges the era's obsession with fragility, but her feints reveal a shared struggle across classes, bodies pushed too far. You pause by a street lamp, its flicker casting shadows on Mary's worn boots. She adjusts her basket, her shoulders slumping. You wonder if she's ever used smelling salts or seen a doctor like the one with his nervous debility theories. Probably not. Her remedies are sleep, when she can get it, and sheer grit. You smirk, imagining her reaction to a ballroom's ventilation committee or a 32-chew dining rule. Joke number 2. If Mary saw a crinoline, she'd probably use it as a laundry basket. The city's hum is softer now, the streets emptying as night deepens. You're heading to the world of Victorian literature next, where fainting heroines shaped real-life swoons. Your corset pinches, Mary's footsteps echo, and you move forward, the era's contrasts humming around you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Fainting wasn't just a rich lady's game, it was a symptom of a society stretching everyone to the limit. Let's keep drifting. You're now curled up in a dimly lit Victorian library, the air heavy with the scent of leather bindings and dusty pages. Your corset's still a nuisance, but you're distracted by the towering bookshelves, crammed with novels that glorify fainting heroines. You're here to explore how Victorian literature shaped the swooning trend, turning faints into romantic ideals that real women felt pressured to mimic. Mainstream history shows that popular novels, think Charlotte Bronte or Wilkie Collins, often portrayed heroines collapsing at emotional peaks, their swoons signaling purity, sensitivity, or love-struck vulnerability. You're flipping through a dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre, its pages worn from countless readers, and you're starting to see how these stories fueled the fainting craze. You settle into a creaky armchair, the book open on your lap. In the story, Jane sways under the weight of Rochester's secrets, her faint painted as a delicate dance with destiny. It's dramatic, almost aspirational. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women reportedly read fainting scenes aloud at book clubs, practicing their own swoons like fangirls memorizing a script. You imagine a gaggle of ladies taking turns, collapsing onto a sofa, giggling through their rehearsals, and you smirk. Joke number 1. Victorian book clubs were probably the original swoon-worthy fan conventions. Historians still argue whether literature directly inspired fainting, or merely reflected existing cultural norms. Some say novels created a feedback loop, glorifying swoons until women felt compelled to perform them. Others think authors were just documenting what they saw in ballrooms and parlors. You're betting on the feedback loop. You recall Evelyn's theatrical faint in the drawing room, her skirts fanning out like a novel's climax. Was she channeling Jane Eyre or just playing her role? You flip to a scene where Jane's described as fragile yet fierce, and you roll your eyes. Sounds like a corset-clad Instagram caption. You glance around the library, where other women read in hushed silence, their faces lit by gas lamps. These novels weren't just entertainment, they were manuals for femininity. Heroines who fainted were rewarded with love, rescue, or sympathy, while bold women often met grim fates. You think back to Mary, the laundress, who'd probably scoff at these swooning heroines. Her faints were from hunger, not heartbreak. But even she might have heard these stories, whispered by maids or read in tattered library copies. The pressure to be delicate seeped everywhere, even into lives far from ballrooms. You smirk, imagining Mary tossing Jane Eyre aside for a practical almanac. Joke number 2. If Mary read these novels, she'd probably faint from boredom first. You run your fingers over the book's embossed cover, feeling the era's contradictions. Literature romanticized fainting, but it also trapped women in a script where collapsing was peak femininity. You recall the fainting room's plush chaise, the ballroom's stifling heat, and wonder how many swoons were real versus performed for an audience raised on Bronte. The line's blurry, and that's what makes this so fascinating. You close the book, its weight grounding you, and feel the library's quiet hum pulling you deeper into the past. The gaslight flickers, casting shadows on the shelves. You're heading to the hidden world of male fainting next, where swoons were hushed to protect masculinity. Your corset pinches, the pages rustle, and you move forward, the era's strange narratives guiding you. The more you read, the clearer it becomes. Fainting wasn't just a physical act, it was a story, written in ink and acted out in parlors. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a smoky Victorian gentleman's club, the air thick with cigar fumes and the clink of whiskey glasses. Your corset's still pinching, but you're out of place here, surrounded by men in tailcoats, their voices low and serious. You're here to uncover the rarely discussed cases of male fainting, hushed up to preserve the era's rigid masculine ideals. Mainstream history tells us that while fainting was a feminine trait, Victorian men occasionally swooned too often, from heat, illness, or emotional shock, but their collapses were downplayed or explained away to avoid embarrassment. You're leaning against a mahogany bar, watching a group of men debate politics, their faces flushed from drink or maybe something else. One man, a lawyer named Henry, sways as he gestures with his glass. He catches himself on a chair, muttering about indigestion, but you suspect he nearly fainted. The others laugh it off, slapping his back. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medical journals sometimes described male fainting as syncope, a fancy term to make it sound scientific rather than weak. You imagine Henry's doctor scribbling syncope in his notes, avoiding the dreaded swoon, and you chuckle quietly. Joke number 1. Victorian men fainted, but they called it strategic napping to save face. Historians still argue whether male fainting was underreported, due to stigma, or simply less common than female swoons. Some say men faced the same physical strains: tight clothing, overheated rooms, but social pressure forced them to hide it. Others think men's heartier diets and looser outfits reduced their risk. You're leaning towards stigma. You recall the ballroom's stifling heat, where ladies dropped like flies, but men, in their wool suits, weren't immune. Henry's quick recovery suggests he's used to brushing this off. You wonder if he's ever reached for smelling salts, like the ones in your pocket, or if that's too ladylike for his pride. You sip a watered-down sherry, the glass cool against your palm. The club's a fortress of masculinity hunting. Trophies on the walls, talk of business and empire, but fainting doesn't care about gender. You think back to Evelyn's theatrical swoon, a performance that earned her sympathy, and contrast it with Henry's hushed moment. If he'd collapsed, the story would be too much whiskey, not delicate nerves. You recall the doctors' theories about women's frail brains and smirk men like Henry probably got a pass, because their skulls were deemed sturdier. It's absurd, but it fits the era's obsession with keeping men tough and women fragile. You notice another man, quieter, nursing a drink in the corner. He looks pale, maybe from a long day or bad news. If he faints, you bet it'll be blamed on overwork or a chill. You think of Mary, the laundress, whose faints were raw and unromantic, and see a thread connecting them, all bodies pushed past their limits, whether by ballrooms or washtubs. Male fainting, though, stays in the shadows, a secret the era guards tightly. You smirk, imagining a gentleman's fainting club with brandy instead of salts. Joke number 2. If men admitted to swooning, they'd probably challenge each other to faint the manliest. The club's fire crackles, its warmth lulling you into the era's rhythm. You're heading to the dawn of scientific skepticism next, where fainting's myths start to crack. Your corset pinches, Henry's glass clinks, and you move forward. The era's hidden stories humming around you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Fainting wasn't just a women's issue, it was a human one, tangled in a web of expectation and denial. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a bustling Victorian lecture hall, the air buzzing with the scratch of pens and the murmur of skeptical voices. Your corset's still a relentless squeeze, but you're caught up in the excitement of new ideas. You're here to witness the early scientists and reformers who began challenging the myth that fainting was tied to women's weaker nature. Mainstream history shows that by the late 19th century, some researchers started questioning the old narratives, pointing to physical causes like corsets, poor diet, and overheating rather than vague notions of delicate nerves. You're seated in a wooden chair, a notebook open, listening to a young doctor named Eliza present her findings to a mostly male audience. Her voice is steady, but the room's tension is palpable. Eliza points to a diagram of a corset's effects on the lungs, her chalk squeaking on the board. She argues that fainting often stems from restricted breathing, not some inherent female flaw. The men shift uncomfortably, some scoffing, others scribbling notes. Here's a quirky tidbit. One reformer, Dr. Mary Walker, wore trousers to protest corsets, claiming they'd have fainting cases if women ditched them. You imagine strutting in pants at a ball, shocking the crinoline crowd, and grin. Joke number 1. Trousers as medicine? Dr. Walker was the Victorian equivalent of a wellness influencer. Historians still argue whether these early skeptics shifted public views or were drowned out by traditionalists. Some say their work laid the groundwork for medical reform. Others think their ideas were dismissed as radical until the 20th century. You're rooting for Eliza, but you see the resistance in the room. She cites studies showing men faint to remember Henry in the Gentlemen's Club and suggests environment, not gender, is the culprit. You recall the ballroom's stifling heat, Mary's hunger-driven swoons, and nod. Eliza's onto something. But the old guard isn't budging. They cling to hysteria like it's a scientific gospel. You flip through your notebook, where you've jotted details from the doctor's office, the ballroom, the library. Eliza's ideas tie them together. Corsets, heat, and scant meals aren't just inconveniences. They're fainting's engine. You think of Evelyn's theatrical swoon, propped up by novels and social rules, and wonder if she'd cheer for Eliza or clutch her smelling salts in horror. The lecture hall's gaslights flicker, casting shadows on the crowd. You notice a few women in the back, their faces eager but cautious. They're likely reformers too, fighting for looser clothes or better food. Small steps toward a world where fainting isn't a job requirement. You lean forward, catching Eliza's closing argument. Fainting isn't destiny, it's design. She's bold, but the room's mixed response tells you change is slow. You smirk, imagining her debating the ventilation committee from the ballroom, or the doctor with his electric belts. Joke number 2. If Eliza ran a ballroom, she'd install fans and ban corsets, and fainting would go out of business. You glance at a man next to you, muttering about female exaggeration. He's probably fainted himself, blaming syncope to save face. The era's stubborn, but cracks are forming, and you're here for it. The lecture hall's hum is lulling, the chalk dust settling. You're heading to the fading of fainting's fashion X, where these ideas take root and swoons slip away. Your corset pinches, Eliza's voice echoes, and you move forward, the era's shifting tides guiding you. The more you hear, the clearer it becomes. Fainting wasn't just a symptom, it was a myth, unraveling as science dared to question. Let's keep drifting. You're drifting through the twilight of the Victorian era now, the air softer, the gas lights dimming as London streets hum with change. Your corset's grip feels looser, your gown less heavy, as if the world itself is easing up. You're here to watch fainting fade from fashion, a slow unraveling as Victorian norms soften and swoons lose their allure. Mainstream history tells us that by the early 20th century, fainting declined as women's roles expanded, corsets fell out of favor, and science debunked myths of delicate nerves. You're standing in a bustling park, watching women in simpler dresses, some even in bloomers, move freely. Their faces flushed not from swooning but from purpose. The era's shifting, and you're along for the ride. You pause by a fountain, its gentle splash blending with birdsong. Reformers like Eliza from the lecture hall have gained ground, their ideas about corsets and diet seeping into society. Women are cycling, working, even protesting, and fainting's no longer a badge of femininity, it's a relic. Here's a quirky tidbit. Department stores started selling rational dress kits, with loose waists and no whalebone, marketed as faint-free fashion. You imagine swapping your crinoline for one, strutting like a liberated peacock, and smile. Joke number 1. Rational dress was probably the Victorian equivalent of yoga pants, comfy and controversial. Historians still argue whether fainting's decline was driven more by fashion, science, or social change. Some say practical clothing and better nutrition cut swoons. Others credit women's push for independence, which made fragility less appealing. You're betting on all three. You think back to Evelyn's theatrical swoon, Mary's exhausted collapse, Henry's hushed syncope. Their faints were shaped by a world that's now cracking open. You spot a young woman reading a newspaper, her posture bold, no fan or salts in sight. She's worlds away from the drawing room's etiquette or the ballroom's heat, and you feel a quiet thrill at the shift. You wander deeper into the park, the grass cool under your feet, the fainting room's shades, the smelling salts, the novels glorifying swoons, they're fading into memory, like props from a play no one performs anymore. You recall the doctor's nervous debility nonsense and Eliza's chalkboard diagrams, proving fainting was a design flaw, not destiny. Even working-class women like Mary benefit, with shorter hours and better food easing their burdens. You smirk, imagining Mary cycling past a ballroom, her laundry basket traded for a satchel. Joke number 2. If Mary saw a fainting room now, she'd probably turn it into a nap nook. The park's serenity wraps around you, the era's weight lifting. Fainting's decline feels like a collective exhale, a step toward a world where women aren't scripted to collapse. You sit on a bench, the horizon glowing with dusk, and let the moment sink in. The stories of swoons, romantic, desperate, or hidden, are part of a past that's slipping away, leaving space for something new. You're ready to drift off. The park's calm a perfect lullaby. Wind down, you're resting now, the park fading into a gentle blur, the fountain's splash softening to a whisper. The weight of Victorian expectations, corsets, etiquette, fragile ideals dissolves, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the cool evening air. You're safe here, wrapped in the quiet of a world moving forward, where fainting's just a curious tale, not a demand. Let your breathing slow, each inhale deep and unhurried, your body sinking into the bench's embrace. The stories of Evelyn, Mary, Henry, and Eliza linger, but they're distant now, like stars in a twilight sky. You don't need to hold onto them. The park's glow fades, the air grows still, and you're drifting, carried by a calm that feels like home. Sleep's waiting, soft and certain, ready to catch you as gently as a Victorian lady once fell. Close your eyes, let go, and rest.